The Apartheid government tortured people to protect their secrets. They assassinated people to protect their secrets. They built one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations in Africa, specifically so that nobody could see what they were doing, and to protect their most sensitive communications, they bought the best encryption technology money could buy, Swiss-made, impenetrable, trusted by 120 governments worldwide. The CIA was reading every single encrypted message they sent in real time, because the Swiss company was not Swiss. It was a CIA front, secretly purchased in 1970. The machines were rigged, and South Africa was explicitly named on the target list. Let us meet the cast. There is Boris Hagelin, Russian-born Swedish engineer, the man who sold the cipher machines to the US Army in the World War II and became, in his own words, the first crypto millionaire in the world. There is William Friedman, chief cryptologist of the NSA and Hagelin's close personal friend, who was quietly receiving technical briefings on Crypto AG's machines and their customers for years before the CIA bought anything. There is the CIA and the West German intelligence, the BND, who purchased Crypto AG together in 1970 for $5.7 million and named Operation Rubicon. And there is the Apartheid government of South Africa, running wars, building nuclear bombs, and assassinating dissidents, all while their most sensitive communications flowed through machines the CIA had mathematically broken before they ever arrived. Crypto AG was founded in 1952 in Switzerland, not because Boris Hagelin loved fondue, because in the context of Cold War encryption technology, the Swiss address was commercially transformative, neutral, stable, not aligned with any military bloc, not an enemy of anyone. That credential opened doors that no British or American manufacturer could walk through. 230 employees, offices in Abu Dhabi, Buenos Aires, Kuala Lumpur, Muscat, and Abidjan. By the 1970s, between 80 and 90% of the entire global market for encryption equipment was using Crypto AG products. This was not a company that sneaked into government procurement. It was the dominant supplier in a critical market. Over 120 countries bought from them. Western democracies, authoritarian states, non-aligned nations, Iran, India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Italy, Argentina, and Apartheid South Africa. There was one structural detail that in hindsight was the most important clue something was wrong. The ownership of Crypto AG was held through barrier shares deposited in a Liechtenstein holding company operating through a Liechtenstein law firm. Barrier shares, whoever physically holds the shares owns the company, no public register, no traceable ownership chain. The company's own senior managers could not tell you who owned the businesses they were running every day. The opacity was not a consequence of the deception, it was a precondition for it. You buy the company, keep everything the same on the surface, same address, same employees, same Swiss neutrality, same professional reputation. Then you get the NSA to redesign the algorithms at the heart of the encryption in a way that looks completely secure from the outside but contains a mathematical weakness that only you know about. Not a simple trapdoor an alert engineer might notice, a subtle degradation of the mathematical properties that makes encryption work, engineered so that the NSA's specific computational resources and knowledge of exactly where the weakness was located could break it efficiently. Two versions of every machines were produced. Countries on the secure list, primarily NATO members, and a small number of close partners received genuine encryptions. Countries on the target list received machines the CIA could read, same documentation, same operating manuals, same professional installation and support. No way for the customer to know which version they had been given. The NSA went further. They wrote the operating manuals for certain models specifically to ensure that users configured them in ways that maximized the intelligence yield. They were not just building a backdoor, they were writing the instructions that kept the door open. By 1980, the NSA was reading approximately 96% of all traffic encrypted using the electronic Crypto AG machines. The CIA owns internal assessment called it the intelligence coup of the century. Their words: foreign governments were paying good money to the United States and West Germany for the privilege of having their most secret communications read by at least 2 foreign countries, and South Africa was on the list. On 11 February 2020, the Washington Post, German broadcaster ZDF, and Swiss broadcaster SRF simultaneously published the results of 2 years of investigation into Operation Rubicon. Among the documents was the target list. Under the Africa category, South Africa appears by name, not caught accidentally in a signals net, specifically identified, sold rigged machines, systematically bred. The Apartheid government was fighting a major conventional war. From 1966 onwards, the South African Defence Force was engaged in Angola and Namibia against Cuban troops, Soviet-backed MPLA forces, and SWAPO guerrillas. Operation Savannah in 1975, Operation Protea in 1981, the largest South African military operation since World War II, Operation Askari in 1983 and 1984, the critical battles around Kuto-Kwana Valley in 1987 and 1988, the orders from Pretoria to field commanders, the intelligence assessments from the theater, the political deliberations about escalation. If those communications ran through Crypto AG, the CIA had access to the operational communications of South Africa's military for nearly 2 decades of intensive combat. And then there is a nuclear program. South Africa began developing nuclear weapons in the 1970s. By approximately 1979, the country had its first operational nuclear device. 6-gun type nuclear devices were ultimately built. A 7th was partially completed before the program was voluntarily terminated in 1989, ahead of the transition to democracy. South Africa remains to this day the only nation to have voluntarily dismantled the nuclear arsenal it had built itself. If the communications of a secret nuclear weapons program were running through Crypto AG equipment, the CIA potentially had unprecedented access to the internal deliberations of a government building nuclear bombs in secret. The coordination between the ministries, the military communications, the scientific program, discussions about testing, storage, and strategic doctrine, all of it potentially available in Washington. August 1977, Soviet reconnaissance satellites photograph the Kalahari Desert. What they find looks like an underground nuclear test site under construction. Shafts drilled, support structures erected, the physical signatures of a site being prepared for a nuclear test, visible from space. The Soviets share the intelligence with the Americans. Within weeks, the Western powers launch a diplomatic intervention and South Africa dismantles the site and issues denials. The CIA had owned Crypto AG since June 1970. By August 1977, the operation was 7 years old and running at full capacity. The Western powers moved very quickly. The intervention was well targeted. They knew which pressure points to apply. They achieved results in weeks. That kind of speed is more consistent with powers that had independent intelligence about the program than with powers who were entirely dependent on a satellite photograph as their first warning. Then, 22nd September 1979, a US Vela satellite designed to detect nuclear explosions from space records a double flash in a remote area of the South Atlantic. A double flash is a specific signature of a nuclear explosion. A very brief initial flash followed immediately by a much brighter second flash. The leading hypothesis among researchers is that this was a joint South African-Israeli nuclear test. South Africa and Israel had a documented close defense relationship through the 1970s and 1980s. The United States maintained official uncertainty about what the double flash was for decades. If the CIA had intelligence from inside South Africa's encrypted communications that confirmed the nuclear test had taken place, the official uncertainty was not genuine. It was a managed public position designed to avoid the diplomatic consequences of officially confirming that a close Cold War partner had conducted an undeclared nuclear test. That is one of the most significant unresolved questions in the nuclear history of the Cold War. The Crypto AG revelation makes it a question we can now ask with considerably more precision. Apartheid government built BOSS in 1969 under Hendrik van der Berg, which answered directly to the Prime Minister and had unlimited operational scope. Files on hundreds of thousands of citizens, surveillance of activists, journalists, lawyers, churchmen, academics, operations across Africa, psychological warfare against the ANC, John Foster Square, Steve Biko died there in 1977, the entire structure rested on one foundational assumption, that the regime's own communications were secure. Every encrypted diplomatic cable, every classified military communications about Angola, every operational communication between the intelligence officers running agents across the continent, every internal discussion about the nuclear program flowing through crypto AG machines available to Washington. The watchers were being watched by their own ally through the technology they trusted the most. Did CIA intercept inform the US government's response to the 1977 Kalahari test preparations? What did those intercepts reveal about the 1979 Vela incident? And if they confirmed the nuclear test, what was the actual basis for the official US position of uncertainty? The Apartheid security apparatus was conducting extensive operations against the ANC throughout this period. Was any of that CIA intelligence shared with the Apartheid government as counterintelligence operations against the liberation movement? Was any of it shared with the ANC through sympathetic governments? When the ANC came to power in 1994, a substantial archive of CIA intelligence about Apartheid South Africa passed from being strategically relevant to being historically significant. What happened to that archive? Does any of it remain in the CIA files? What process would allow the South African government or South African researchers to access it? The Truth and Reconciliation Commission documented what the Apartheid state did. The Crypto AG story raises the question of what foreign intelligence services knew about what the Apartheid state was doing and what they chose to do with that information. That dimension of the Apartheid story has not yet been told.
Imagine that. If Huawei becomes the leading 5G provider in the world, then China can spy on everyone, which is terrible, because that's what America wants to do.
From roughly 2018 onwards, the United States government has been warning the world about Huawei. The argument: Huawei builds network infrastructure governments around the world use. If Huawei is subject to Chinese intelligence requirements, the infrastructure could provide Chinese intelligence with access to communications flowing through it. The United States making that argument is one of the most extraordinary pieces of geopolitical irony in the history of communications security. The CIA owned an encryption company. The NSA backdoored the algorithms. They sold rigged machines to 120 countries. They called it the intelligence coup of the century. And now the United States is warning the world about Huawei. This is not hypocrisy in the simple moral sense. It is a description of how great powers actually operate. Every major power that can build backdoors into technology will build backdoors into technology. The Apartheid government never asked who ultimately owned Crypto AG. The Swiss neutrality was reassuring. The technical reputation was impeccable. Nobody knew who owned the company, and for decades the CIA read their mail. The question is whether the current generation of decision makers in South Africa and everywhere else will learn from that mistake or repeat it in a new package. The bell rang for 50 years. The question is who is building the next bell and who is already listening.